How can anyone know if someone's agreed to sex if either one of them has had too much to drink? How much do you have to have drunk to be able to willingly give consent? Whose fault is it? And what if someone changes their mind about the way they feel the next day? This film looks at a typical case where one party thought everything was okay and the other didn't. We've tried to answer some of the questions you might have too.
Hello there, my name's Maeve.
And I'm Brooke.
And we're lawyers in London at a firm called Kingsley Napley. We both specialise in criminal litigation, and we deal with adults and young people that find themselves caught up in the criminal justice system every single day.
Today we're going to be talking to you about consent and alcohol. We're going to be taking you through a case study that we often see in our day-to-day work.
Anton and Steph were at a house party. They'd been sending each other flirty messages all week and ended up kissing a few hours into the night. By midnight, Anton noticed that Steph had been doing quite a lot of shots and was starting to slur her words. Anton was also pretty drunk at this stage and decided he wanted to take a few more shots himself to catch up with Steph in the hope that he could make a move later on. Anton wakes up the next morning with a hazy memory of being in one of the bedrooms at the house party with Steph. He remembers her taking her top off, so he took his trousers off and they were kissing. Steph kept falling over each time she stood up, so they had to lie down on the bed. He put his hand up her skirt, pulled down her underwear and touched her vagina. She didn't tell him to stop, she didn't actually say anything at all. He stopped after a few minutes, as it seemed that she may have fallen asleep. He put his trousers back on and he decided to leave her in the bedroom. He jumped in a cab. He looks down at his phone the next morning and he sees that Steph has sent him an angry text message, which reads, "I couldn't believe you took advantage of me. I'm going to the police."
Why don't you stop the video now and discuss whether you think any offences were committed?
This is a situation neither party ever want to find themselves in, and unfortunately it's really not that uncommon.
The facts of the case are definitely not clear. We're going to talk to you now about the various offences that could have happened this night and go on to talk about consent.
A sexual assault is committed when person A intentionally touches person B. The touching is sexual. Person B does not give their consent, or person A does not reasonably believe that person B is consenting. The maximum sentence for this is 10 years imprisonment.
A rape is committed where person A intentionally penetrates the vagina, anus or mouth of person B with their penis, and a person B does not give their consent, or person A does not reasonably believe that person B consents. The maximum sentence is life imprisonment.
When the penetration is not by a penis, then the offence is slightly different. It's called sexual assault by penetration, but it also carries a maximum sentence of life imprisonment.
We of course don't know Steph's full account, but we do know from Anton that there was some sexual touching that evening.
The key factor in determining whether an offence was committed is whether or not Steph consented, or if Anton had reasonable belief in her consent. Now, giving and getting consent is absolutely crucial. And I think it's useful to have a think now about what we mean by consent.
So the law defines consent as a person who agrees by choice and a person that has freedom and capacity to make that choice. So we can break that down into two tests. Number one, does the person have capacity? This means, do they have capacity to make a choice about whether or not to engage in that sexual act? The second test is, did the person choose freely to do the act? Okay. And secondly, whether that person made that choice freely and was not constrained in any way. The question of capacity to consent is particularly relevant when the complainant is intoxicated.
Unsurprisingly, facts like this have come up time and time again in front of the courts. And it has been said that if a person consumes so much alcohol that they lose the capacity to consent, which is the first part of that test Brooke was talking about, that they're not consenting, and that would be considered rape. When the courts are determining at which point somebody loses the capacity, they will look at loads of circumstantial factors. But they did find in that same case that you do not have to wait until somebody's unconscious to lose the capacity to consent. It can depend on a whole load of factors, and you may lose that capacity after a few drinks or after a few more drinks. It really does depend on the facts of the case.
When a court is considering whether a person is so intoxicated that they lose capacity, they might look at all the other circumstantial evidence around that evening or around the time of the event. So they might talk to friends and witnesses.
Take a few moments now to think about the facts of the case and consider what aspects are important when determining whether Steph was consenting or not.
From the messages Steph sent Anton the next day, it's clear that she did not believe that she was consenting at the time. This is not enough in and of itself to show that she wasn't consenting in the moment, but it would definitely be relevant. Anton's account is that she had been falling over in his bedroom, slurring her speech, and that she said nothing at all when he touched her. All of those factors point towards Steph being intoxicated and having lost the capacity to consent. On these facts, it would be really difficult for Anton to show that he had reasonable belief in her consent by the account she has given.
And we're not saying that any time people drink and have sex that it's rape or it's not consensual. That's really not what we're saying. But you have to be extremely mindful when you are under the influence of alcohol or drugs that this can impact on the complainant's capacity to consent and your ability to understand the indications about whether somebody is consenting or not.
The fact that Anton had been drinking is also not a defence, and he can't argue that because he was drunk he didn't know whether Steph consented or not.
Sadly, drinking heavily is often connected with sexual offences, and government figures show that in 38% of cases offenders are under the influence of alcohol, and this is matched by 38% of victims also being under the influence of alcohol.
This information is not here to scare you, and as Maeve said, it's not to say that whenever you drink alcohol and you have sex, you're not consenting, but it's just to make you really aware of the severe implications of what not consenting in sex can mean for you.
Remember that consent is the difference between sex and rape. Is the difference between not committing an offence and committing a very serious offence. So we hope that your understanding of the law, now that you have it, will help you make informed decisions and sensible decisions so that your life is not impacted.
Do you guys have any questions you want to ask us?
Hi, my name is Maddie and I'm 16, and my question is, what happens if the genders were the other way around, or if it was the same genders involved? Would it make a difference to how the case was dealt with or how it would be proven?
The gender of the complainant or victim really makes no difference. It is all about the elements of the offence and proving whether that offence was committed, and consent is relevant for all genders.
And it's about whether person A touches person B. It really doesn't matter the genders either way around. So that's just something to be really conscious of. It's about whether those other elements of the offence are satisfied, and consent, regardless of which gender does it to which gender, that is the key.
Hello, my name is Allegra and I'm 17, and my question is, how much alcohol has to be drunk before consent becomes invalid?
So within that case that I was talking about, the judge said that consent, you do not have to be absolutely passed out to lose capacity to consent. And what they'll look at is all those circumstantial factors, you know, your age, how often you drink, your weight, how witnesses around might say that somebody was acting. So there's no, you have 3 drinks and that means you've lost the capacity to consent. It's really quite personal, and that's why these cases are quite difficult. You know, it's really quite hard sometimes to prove that somebody's lost the capacity to consent. You'll be looking at how they were acting, were they falling over? Were they acting in a weird way? All those little things.
My name's Ellie and I'm 17. My question is, would the person still be prosecuted if the victim didn't want to press charges?
That is a really good question, and I think it's something that a lot of people don't always appreciate. Well, they don't always appreciate how important it is and how much of an impact you making a complaint to the police has on another person's life. There are certain ways that someone can stop an investigation or try to stop that, and you can maybe write a letter to the police explaining why you're withdrawing your complaint. But there'll be lots of factors that the police will then have to go through, and they'll have to do risk assessments on the victim. For example, in domestic abuse cases, it may be that the person who's committed the crime has been trying to kind of force the complainant or victim to stop making the allegation and to withdraw their complaint. So the police will have to be really conscious of that and undertake risk assessments of the complainant to make sure that they are withdrawing their complaint for the right reasons and because they want to, but it not necessarily is the answer. So yeah.
My name is Eva and I'm 17, and my question is, Anton said he held his hand on her vagina, but as she didn't say no, is that still classified as consent?
So identifying consent can be done in loads of different ways. What you're talking about is a verbal cue. So there's verbal cues, there's also body language, there are loads of different ways you can infer consent. I would say the easiest way to make sure that you've got consent is to ask. So if two people are in a situation, the best way to be pretty sure that the person is consenting is just to ask them. And if he had done that, we'd have a very different fact pattern. The fact she's silent in combination with all those other factors means that it would be hard for him to show reasonable belief in consent. So if she verbalized yes or verbalized no, that would go into one of the factors he would point at if he said, oh, I reasonably believe she consented because she said yes. It's quite difficult to say, I reasonably believe she consented because she didn't say anything and then I thought she fell asleep. So do you see how it works in? So it's not determinative. A verbal cue is not determinative, but it is really, really helpful. And I always think, if in doubt, just ask. That really does solve a lot of problems.
Hi, my name's Jude and I'm 16. And in the case of sexual assault, how would it be handled if consent was originally given and then contracted?
Yeah, so that's really important. Consent doesn't mean as soon as you start having sex, it doesn't mean that you've consented to that full act, and you can withdraw your consent at any point. So at any moment during the act, you can stop consenting. It needs to be clear that you've stopped consenting, and you need to make the other party aware that you are, that you've stopped consenting. But yeah, it's a moving thing, and it doesn't mean as soon as you consent that you've consented to have sex with them for the whole act. It also doesn't mean if you have sex one time and then sex another time that for the second time you've consented. It's a discussion that you should be having with your partner, I guess, as it happens.
Hello, my name's Callum, I'm 16, and my question is, does relationship status make a difference?
That's a good point. It doesn't really. It's not determinative. Each sexual act that you enter into has to be consensual, regardless of whether that person is your partner or if they aren't, and or even if that person you're in a marriage with. That really doesn't matter. And as we were saying, each case will be looked at on its facts. And just because your boyfriend or girlfriend or partner consents one time does not mean that they will consent the next time. So it's something that they will maybe look at and be something that is taken into consideration, but it won't really be given much weight. And actually, a lot of sexual assaults and rapes do happen within relationships. So it's a really good point to make, and I think it's quite surprising actually that a lot of things happen within a relationship and consent has to be considered every single time.
Yeah, I think a lot of people think about rape as being the stranger rape where it's down a dark alley, but I think for the most part, rapes and sexual assaults happen within a domestic relationship, and so
or by somebody known to you or them, a friend,
exactly.
a cousin, a brother of somebody that you know.
Yeah.
Alcohol can play a huge part in understanding those verbal cues that we spoke about, or the body language, because it can inhibit your mind and it can really change how you understand and perceive a situation, be that you as the complainant or the victim, or be that as the perpetrator. And I think when consuming alcohol or taking alcohol, you need to be extremely mindful of the impact it can have on your ability to give and receive and understand and ultimately accept consent.